Hey, a man from Bullbite Systems. Welcome. Welcome once again to a new VBA macro video. I have this weird looking assembly. It contains a bunch of sheet metal parts from the SOLIDWORKS training files. I put them all together in one assembly. And we're going to write a little macro that prints the components, or rather the parts, as DXF. And that's going to run from the top level assembly. So we'll traverse the tree, get all the components, make them visible, and then call an API to print them as a DXF in the same location as the original file. By the way, if any of you guys watching has a really good assembly that they can donate that has sheet metal parts and whatnot, I'll be very thankful. I'm not too happy about this assembly, but it does the job. All right. Before we start doing this, I would like to try not to reinvent the wheel when it comes to printing a DXF. So I looked up online if there's an existing macro that can do that. And I found my buddy's Artem's code here on costack.net. So if you guys don't know what Costack is, it's a really awesome website that contains a lot of macros and just good knowledge about the API. Feel free to go and visit it, costack.net here, and we're just going to copy paste this code from the main subroutine. That's going to call this API function, or API call, export to DWG. And I got to put my phone on do not disturb. Apologies about that. Yeah, let's get going. So I'm going to switch over to VBA here. I'm going to bring my VBA editor to the forefront, or the foreground, and I'm gonna maximize it. So if you don't know how to open this, just go to Tools, Macros, and then click on New. It will prompt you to save a new macro. Just save it to whatever location you want, and then it will open up this. There'll be a bunch of code here. Just delete that code, and yeah, we can get started on it. All right, if you don't want to watch me write the rest of this macro, there's a link in the description below that will take you to our GitHub and will contain the entire code for this macro, so you can use that if you're in a hurry. But if you're not, you can stick along, and we're going to write this together. All right, first thing is first is I'm going to define a SWApp variable, and that will be as an SOLIDWORKS, right? And this variable here will hold a pointer to the SOLIDWORKS application. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create another variable. We'll call it SWModel as model.doc2. And I'll do the same thing. Another variable here for the assembly. We'll call it assembly as assembly.doc, since we're going to be working with components, right? And then I think I can do main and sub main, and this is where we'll write our code. Awesome. So I'll start by setting the SWApp equals application.SOLIDWORKS, and then I'll just set the SWModel, right, equal to SWApp.ActiveDoc. Awesome. And then we can start by making sure that there is a document in the active session of SOLIDWORKS, and that document is actually an assembly. So I'm not going to do that here, but if you want to find out how to write that portion of this macro, then go back and watch my first video. And I'll put a link in the description of this video. Whether you're watching it on YouTube or LinkedIn, you will get that info. I've got some notes here on my other screen, so if you guys see me looking to my left here, it's fine. I guess the first thing we're going to do is obviously check, or rather, we've made our check if the document if the active document exists, and then if it's a assembly. Now the next thing we're going to do is that we need to get a list of components. All right, so let's start with that. So how do we get a list of components? Well, the first of all, we need to set the SW assembly to be equal to the model, right? And this will open up a list of methods and properties from which we're going to use one called getComponents. Now getComponents, when you supply it with a false parameter, will return all the components at all the levels of the assembly. Obviously, this will return some sort of value. It's going to be a variant, so we need to define a variable, call it VComponents of that variant, which is basically anything, but here it's going to be an array of components. So VComponents equals SW assembly dot getComponents false. And obviously, you do not need to do set with when you're setting, for the lack of a better word, variants in VBA. All right. Now that we have our components, what we can do is go and create our function. So let's create another subroutine. We'll call it sub process, and this subroutine is going to take we'll call it print DXF. We'll have it take a byref. Let's call this, for clarity reasons, SW component model doc, so that we can differentiate between the model doc of the top level document and then the model doc of the component. So this function is going to take the components model doc, and we're going to use that to print that document as a DXF. Right, so let's do that. Well, we need to make sure, first of all, that the part or the model is actually a part. So if SW component model doc get type equals to SW const SW documents types dot SW doc part doc or doc, sorry, part. And then end if. I use the double equal sign there because I've been writing quite a bit of C# code lately, so that's a carryover from that language. And then once we have checked that if the document is a part, I think we can actually define a variable here. We'll call it SW part doc as part doc. Why are we doing this? It's because the API call that's gonna save this model as a DXF exists in the part doc interface. So we'll do that here. So SW part doc equal to SW component model doc. Now that we have that, we can actually go and make our API, or call that API call, which is called export to DWG2. Even though that it says DWG, it can also export to DXF. We can call that API call to save the document, but before we do that, we need to define the path rather of this DXF. So let's initially start by getting the path of the components model doc. So I've defined a variable here called path name as string, and then I'm going to do path name equal to SW component model doc dot get path, and this will return the path to the components model doc, or pretty much the document. That's the complete path, and then from the complete path we can do some string manipulation in order to truncate or split that SLD dot or dot SLD PRT at the end and replace that with a DXF. So actually I'm just gonna copy some code from here, and I'll comment it. I'll make some comments on it. So if I were to paste this here, and we're gonna make some changes here. So I'll start with changing this to this and this and this. So pretty much what we have here is the string manipulation. I'm defining, or rather we're defining a new variable called outPath, and that variable outPath is going to be the DXF path name. So we're using the left function, the string.left, to just split it and remove the remaining 6 characters, which are pretty much SLD PRT, and then we're appending the out path with the DXF so that we have an entire path that ends with DXF. So that's pretty much these two lines here are the string manipulation that we need. And then in order for this, and then we're going to call the API call called export to DWG. However, before we do that, we need to make sure that the document is visible, right? And what document? I think we're referring to the SW component model doc. So the document that we're trying to save. So let's change that here and here. And then obviously I need to make sure that we have this part doc changed to be this one so that we're consistent across the entire macro and make sure that we have proper indentation here. All right. Okay. Now let's take a look at the export to DWG. It's asking for a file path, which is the path that we're going to save that DXF to, the model name, which we have, and then some extra settings, export sheet metal, a bunch of other stuff that you guys can definitely read and get more information on by going to the SOLIDWORKS API online help or offline help. We're not interested in doing that in this video. Now, before we go, I need to copy one more thing from my notes here, which is this enum right here that you guys are not going to find in the API help. So sheet metal option, this is how our buddy Artem is defining this parameter, and he is using these parameters here, put them all together in a sheet metal options enum, kind of a really nice fancy way to put that info there, but you won't find this in the, I think, in the SW const library, so just be aware of that. So I think we're good on all fronts when it comes to exporting to DXF. All we have to do now is to go back to our code and actually call the print DXF function, right? So in order to do that, let's just reverse the V component. So for each component in V components, do next component, and in here I'm going to have to define a component just as a placeholder variable, and then in here I'm just going to define SW component as a strongly typed variable. When I say strongly typed, I simply mean that it has a type that's defined, unlike this one here, as a, I'll call this one component, and then we'll have to set it. So SW component equal to component, and then this, and then we're gonna have to, I guess, since print DXF requires a model doc too, we need to get a model doc from the component, right? Yep. So we need to do that. So let's start by defining here a variable called SW component model doc. We'll keep the same one as the one we use for the argument as model doc. And then we'll say SW component model doc equals to SW component, and this is a method that exists in the component to interface that is called get model doc2 that will return a pointer or a variable or whatever you want to call it of that model doc2. Right. We need to make sure that that SW component model doc is not null, right? It is not nothing. Why? Well, it's because you could have components that are suppressed, right? Otherwise, our code will bomb here. So we need to make sure that we do we check for that. So if not SW component model doc is nothing, then we can actually print the DXF. So we'll print DXF, yay, SW component model doc. Yep, well, looks good. What do I want to do here that I think we're missing? I think we're gonna have to print the location of one of the components so we can go and grab that and look at the files in in File Explorer later. I'll do that here in a minute, but I think we need to do one more check of the logic here, because I think we're missing one more important detail. So we're getting the model doc2, we're checking if the model doc2 is not nothing, and then we're simply calling the print DXF function. Now, components are simply instances of model docs, right? Of documents. So we can have duplicates, right? So instances are basically duplicates. We need to make sure that we don't save the same document maybe once, twice, thrice. So we need to make sure that we only do that once. How do we do that? I think we need one more thing called a collection that we're going to save the documents to, or the documents that we've processed. And then we're going to check if that collection contains a file name or the file name that was processed. And if it does, we skip it. When I mean skip it, I mean skip that item in this for each loop. So let's go up here and just define a collection. Let's call it processed files as new collection. So right, when you use the new keyword here, you don't have to use the set keyword to do set process file equal new collection, so it takes care of itself. And then in here, once we process a component, right? So processed files, add, and we'll just add the model doc get title, which will return the file name of the component. If you guys want to make things more interesting, you can do an and then you can make sure that the component virtual equals false, and that will ignore virtual components, right? Alrighty, so that every time we process a DXF or process a component, we add it to this list of files, right? We just have to make sure that we check before we process the component that it exists in the process file, and then if it exists, we skip it, or we check that if it doesn't exist, and if it doesn't exist, we process it. So that's what we're going to do next. And in order to do that, I'm going to copy one more piece of code, just because VBA doesn't have the good functions to search for data in data structures. So I have created this function here called, or rather, I've got it from Stack Overflow. You know, truth must be told. The function is called existing collection, and it pretty much tries to find if an item exists in a collection, right? So what do we do here? We just have to make sure that our component that we're about to process actually does not exist, right? So if I go up back to our code here, we just have to go down to this level, right? And then we'll just do if exists in collection. That's the third L, we don't need it. The collection would be called process files, comma, and the key will be SW component model doc get title. That's a mouthful. Should have named it something different. Equals false. Then and only then process the file and add it to the list of process file. Process the component, print it as a DXF, and then add it to the processed file collection. Alrighty. And yeah, remembering what I said about a minute ago, that we need to print the location of the file, or the location of the DXF, or location of the model. So we'll just print it here. Get path, so we can copy it later from this immediate window, so that we can find it in File Explorer. So I'll cut that out and I'll put it somewhere. Yeah, we'll keep it here. This should be good. At least in this for loop, or in this if statement, we already have we've already made sure that SW component model doc is not nothing. So this cannot return exception. All right. Let's get ready to rumble. Hopefully we've made sure that we've got everything. So I'm just gonna run this code and see what we get. Maybe we'll have one or two things missed, but apparently it's doing its thing. Yeah, I think it's printing all of those DXFs. This is awesome. If you guys like to watch more VBA videos, then please make sure to follow me on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share this with your coworkers, your friends, anyone that you think is interested in SolidWorks and particularly the SolidWorks API. Awesome stuff here. Alrighty. We've definitely gone past the 20-minute line here. And if I were to cut this path and go and find that path in this location, you can see that we've got some beautiful DXFs. Alrighty. Yeah, so this is how you print all the sheet metal parts in the active assembly as a DXF. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.